Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 44th Toronto International Film Festival and this screening of Hope Gap, directed by Bill Nicholson. My name is Adam Cook, and I'm from the festival programming team. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this event takes place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community. A reminder that this film is eligible for the Grolsch People's Choice Award. You can vote for your favorite films at tiff.net/vote. We would like to thank Roadside Attractions, Level Film, Screen Media, and Protagonist Pictures for providing us with this film, and for their continued generous support. A huge thank you to the British Film Council. Let's give them a round of applause. Now, we are thrilled to have the world premiere of Hope Gap at TIFF, and even more fortunate to have the filmmaker with us in Toronto, not just a director, but a novelist and prolific Academy Award-nominated screenwriter. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Bill Nicholson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing to be here and to have this audience. You are only the second audience in the universe to see this movie. The first was last night, and apart from my family, my loved ones, all of whom think the film is amazing, I'm very happy to say, but it matters to me a great deal to have some total strangers respond to it. So I hope you like it. When we do the Q&A afterwards, I would like to ask you to think, this is a film about a marriage breakup, and I know that in Canada, which is a stable country, marriages don't break up. But for those of you who may have heard about it, I'd be very interested afterwards to learn who in this story you empathize with. There's three characters. They're based on my mother, my father, and myself. Obviously you empathize with me, but apart from that, I'd be really interested to know which side your sympathies come down on, and I'll tell you right now, my plan is that you understand both of them, and I think this is something that isn't done enough in the world of cinema. We've got a lot of man-bashing films and some women-bashing films, and this is an attempt to go deeper and truer, a bit more painful. So see what you think, and I'll ask you afterwards. I'd just like to ask my producer, David Thompson, to come on. He's not only my producer, he was also best man at my wedding a very long time ago. We've known each other a long time. This film has been a very, very happy experience, and that's down to David, who put together an amazing team and watched my back, because nobody can do these things alone. People think producers just to handle money. It's not true. They handle the spirit of a film. So thank you, David. Thank you. Enjoy the film.
Please welcome back Bill Nicholson.
Thank you.
Before we open it up to the audience for questions, I'll kick it off, if that's okay. You mentioned in the introduction that there's an autobiographical dimension to this film. I'm wondering if you had always intended on telling this story and what compelled you to do so now.
Well, it's a long time ago. The funny thing is I'm very moved now. Sorry. It's because you're so nice. It's ridiculous, because this is a very long time ago. I'm an extremely old man now, but this all happened when I was a young man, like Josh, and it was very hard then. Sorry.
Take your time.
This is ridiculous. It was very hard then. It's not been hard for a long time, but the funny thing is, I've processed this, and it's been a kind of therapeutic thing for me to try and live through it. And because when it was happening, it was very upsetting.
And I thought I could help, and I couldn't. And I thought that it was, like their problem, and it was my problem. And my mother suffered a lot. And then I wrote a play about it. And my mother saw the play. They're both dead now, my parents. And she said, she read it first. I said, would you mind if I do this? And she said, no, I don't mind. And so I wrote the play, and she read it. She said, darling, it's fine, I don't mind at all, but nobody's going to want to see this. It's so boring. And my father read it, of course, and he said to me, it's fine, but I'm not like that with dogs, you know. So it's kind of really strange for me, this, and they've now died. And in fact, my mother died. My father was slightly younger than my mother, and my mother died when she was 96, and my father died but the same age, but she died about 2 years before him. And he had been living for the previous 40 years with the lady called Angela in the film. And so when my mother died, I obviously rang my father up and I said, she's died. They'd never divorced, my parents never divorced, because my mother didn't want it, she was a Catholic. And my father, whatever you think from the film, I don't know, but he was a decent man. And he didn't divorce her. But shortly after my mother died, he rang me up and he said, I just thought you'd like to know. By the way, the real Angela was called Joan. Joan and I have got married. And at the age of 93, they got married.
You had an incredible cast help you tell this story. Obviously, Annette Bening and Bill Nighy are incredible in the movie. But I was especially touched by Josh O'Connor. Could you talk about finding him and his performance?
Yeah, Josh is completely brilliant. You know, when we were casting, as you probably know, casting is crucial to financing a film. People who put money in need to know who's in the cast because of name recognition. So I was being pushed all the time to get recognized names for all three parts. We had Annette and Bill, which was fantastic. And I was taken to see, well, they came to see me, a number of quite famous young men. And I was kind of dithering. And then Josh came in. And at that point, Josh was not known at all. He'd just done a film which you may have seen called God's Own Country, a very brilliant film. Though very, very different, about a gay Yorkshire farmer. And I'd seen this film and I thought he was amazing. And I said, I want to have Josh. And my producers said, his name means nothing, it doesn't help you. Could you try these other people? And so I said, well, if I have one of these other guys, is that going to mean people are going to come to my movie anymore? And they said, well, probably not. So I said, well, can I have Josh? Please give me Josh. So we went for Josh, and ever since, I've just gone down on my knees in gratitude because I think he's wonderful. He's about to appear, I don't know if any of you watch The Crown, but the new series of The Crown, he's going to be Prince Charles. I think it's because of the sticky out ears, you know. So by the time this film opens in cinemas, which is next spring, and by the way, between now and next spring, you've got time, each of you, to tell 30 people to go and see it. He will be famous, and I think he's going to be very, very famous, partly because, I don't know whether you agree with me, but he's just such a sympathetic guy. And I loved him being me, and he had a lot more hair.
I'm sure the audience has some questions. Yes, go ahead. So the question was about seeing in the credits Escape from Moscow. Could you?
It's The Retreat from Moscow. I originally wrote it 20 years ago as a play called The Retreat from Moscow, and it was actually on Broadway with John Lithgow, Eileen Atkins, and Ben Chaplin in it. And it's been all around the world. And when I decided to turn it into a film, I made a lot of changes, a lot. The ending is very different. Obviously, with a film, you can do things that you can't do. I decided to set it in my childhood town, which is Seaford, where I grew up. And in all sorts of ways, I changed it. But if you had seen the play and if you remember it, you would definitely see that it's kind of at the core the same thing. The play was called The Retreat from Moscow for the reasons that you've seen in the film. It's a sort of metaphor that runs through the story. However, I have to say, as a title, it caused some confusion. So I decided to dump the title for the film.
Yes, go ahead. Okay, so there's a lot of personal questions here. So clearly in the film, Josh's character has some issues with relationships and opening up. So maybe you could talk a bit about what that process was like for you personally.
I'm very glad this has turned into a personal counseling session. You're quite right to point this out. I was 40 when I got married for the first time, which is long enough for all my aunts to have decided I was gay. So yes, I was going to say it did me a lot of damage. I think that's the wrong way to look at it, but it certainly slowed me up. I was very afraid of commitment. Now, that's such a normal male behavior pattern that I don't have to blame my parents for that. But yeah, I was very, very slow to commit. But I'm now extremely old, so I've actually been married 30 years, and I have 3 wonderful children. And you know, something ironic, my wife often says she's very thankful to my mother. My wife and my mother didn't get on, sadly, but she knew that I would never leave. And I'm not going to leave.
In the balcony, go ahead.
It's another personal question, but I'm wondering what percentage of the dialogue is from your memory and your real experience.
Question is about what percentage of the dialogue is from your memory or real experience?
That is a very interesting question. It's a bit difficult to answer because I wasn't taking notes at the time. However, there is one particular section, sorry, the light's very bright. There's one particular section that I wouldn't say it's word for word, but it definitely happened. The scene where the top of the steps by the cliffs, where he says to... when he says, "Don't kill yourself." And I said that to my mother. I said, "Don't do it, because you are going ahead of me. And if you make it, I can make it." And I said that to her. And she stuck it out.
Yes, please.
In your introduction, you asked us which character we might be most empathetic with.
I would love to do a show of hands. Do you want to start?
Made us feel equally empathetic.
Oh. Well, that is exactly what I want to hear. I hope you represent the wider... I mean, I have had quite a few people who, and I totally accept this, who say they really don't like the Grace character. They think she's nuts, and they wouldn't have stayed with her for 1 minute. Could I just see, who thinks Grace is a psychopath? There are a few. There you go. So and that's all right, you're allowed to think that. What I was trying to express, which I know is true of my parents, was that she was profoundly frustrated by not getting an emotional response from my father. And it drove her crazy, and she became quite aggressive towards him, to shock him, as it says, into an emotional response. Now, it was a really bad tactic. And if any of you are in the same situation, I strongly recommend you don't try it. You know, there's a wonderful fable of the sun and the north wind. And there's a man walking along with a coat, and the sun and the north wind have a wager. And the wager is who can get his coat off. And the north wind blows, and he gets colder, and the man pulls his coat tighter and tighter, and he doesn't take it off. And then the sun comes along and goes, shine, 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 and he takes his coat off. And I kind of tried to say to my mother, you're not going to get anywhere by beating him up. But she, we're none of us in control of the things we do. But I have had, some professional psychoanalysts have said to me, that is a classic case study of a narcissist, my mother, which is probably true. But you know what, my father, I said in the film there's a line which I did say to my father, the only thing I blame you for is not telling her what was happening inside you. That is not fair after 30 years of marriage. It just isn't fair. So I blame them both and I love them both. And if you share that, then I've done my job, because... And you know what? There are very few movies out there that are even-handed in this way. I've seen so many movies where usually there's a good, noble woman and a bastard of a man, and you want to kill him. All right, well, that's true, but, we guys have got a side as well. So I really want to redress the balance.
Please, go ahead. So the comment is about the film is like a poem. Could you talk about the poetic side of it?
Yes, well, of course, my mother adored poetry, so I wanted to fill it with poetry. She made an anthology for me. When I was very unhappy, she made an anthology of poetry, which I've still got. So I used that as a kind of basis throughout. It's also, right at the end, people sometimes refer to the lines at the end as a poem, which are written by me, of course, over the long shot at the end. And yes, I wanted to use language, to use the emotion of poetry. In the original version and in the stage version, there's much more poetry. I found people a bit resistant to that, so I had to kind of tone it down. But I love the way poetry can put into words something that you've been feeling and didn't know quite. It's like you knew it, but once it's in words, it's there forever. And what I'm wanting from this film, in my dreams, is that people who go to see it will retain some of the lines and find themselves referencing this in their own lives. Like there's a critical line, there were 3 unhappy people and now there's only 1. That's very, very hard, but it's true. And there are all sorts of moments in the film, like you're the explorers, you're there ahead of me. And I consciously thought as I wrote it, I want this to live and to last. Now that's quite an ambitious way to approach movie making. It's not, I think, usually what happens in movies. But that's what I've been trying to do, and I've been a writer all my life. I've been using words all my life. And in the end, words are the way we tell about what's happening inside ourselves to other people. And art and movies and books, because I write books as well, is the way we tell other people what's happening inside us. And that's the triumph of this whole business, that we don't need to be locked in the limits of our own experience. We can communicate, we can tell the truth, if we're not afraid. And this film is my attempt to add to that process, because I think it makes living more possible for all of us.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Let's go to the balcony again, yeah? So if I heard that correctly, it's about elaborating on that line about there were 3 unhappy people, now there's just 1, but also how your father moved into this new relationship and if he changed the pattern of how he operated in a relationship.
I think this may be me being unfair to my late father, but I think he was choosing safety. And I think he was, in a sense, running away. I don't think, he didn't go in for therapy and so forth. He went somewhere where the anxiety was taken away from him. Joan, the lady who he subsequently married, had come out of an abusive relationship of her own, and the two of them found a quiet haven together. And I don't grudge him that, and I'm very happy that he was happy. But I think there was a part of him that never explored what had happened, whereas my mother certainly did for the rest of her life, too much so. But that's okay. People make their lives work however they can. I think my father had an immense amount of difficulties with feeling that he could own his own desires and things like that. And Joan allowed him to have a quiet life. The two of them found refuge together. And I think, I don't know, maybe today, because this was a while ago, maybe today it would be done differently, but I'm not sure that he was capable. I never had a proper conversation with him ever. He couldn't go into himself at all. And one of the things I've done in the film is I've tried to imagine what he thought and what he was doing. He never told me. Just from watching him, I tried to imagine it. And when my mother saw the play on stage, she said, "Oh my God, that's exactly why he did all those things." And I said, "Well, maybe it is. I don't know. He's never told me." She said, No, that's it. And she internalized the whole thing, and it became her memory. It was very, very strange. But the truth is, I was guessing.
One last question. Yes, please. So the question is about when he's on the railroad track and imagine seeing his father and hugging him. But then he goes and sees his own son at his apartment and doesn't hug him.
I've never even thought of that. It's a very interesting point. I mean, as I think about it, because it would never have occurred to me to write that the character would have gone in and hugged his son, because he can think the thing, but he can't do it. And their physical encounters, as you saw from the film, are always awkward. And that was exactly how it was for me and my father. It was just somehow it didn't work to have a close hug, whereas with the mother it's different. So I think there's a cognitive dissonance there. He's understood something but hasn't extended it into his own life, which I think is true to the character, even if it's a bit sad.
Well, Bill, on behalf of myself, TIFF, and everyone here, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
And thank you very much.
Don't forget to vote for the People's Choice Award, tiff.net/vote. Enjoy the rest of the festival.